England, 1847. The morning fog hung thick over the Hampshire countryside. Rosalind Vance stared out the carriage window, watching the rolling hills pass by. At 26, she had never imagined she would be traveling to meet a new husband, especially not a duke, less than a year after burying her beloved Edward. "We shall arrive at Blackwood Manor within the hour, Mrs. Vance," announced Mr. Abernathy, her late husband's solicitor and the architect of her current predicament. Rosalind clutched her reticule tighter. "And you are certain there is no other way?" "I fear not, madam, with your husband's debts and your family's inability to support you." He trailed off, the implication clear. Without this arrangement, destitution awaited her. The carriage passed through imposing iron gates, adorned with the crest of the Caldwell family, a raven poised for flight. Rosalind's breath caught at the sight of Blackwood Manor, a grand house of weathered dark stone that loomed against the pale sky. It was imposing and Gothic. Its many windows glinted like dark eyes, watching her approach. This would be her home, her prison, or her salvation, she did not yet know. Its beauty was undeniable, yet it held an austere, almost unwelcoming air, as if guarding secrets within its ancient walls. As the carriage pulled to a stop, Rosalind composed herself. Her dark green traveling dress, her best, though modest compared to what would be expected of a duchess, was carefully chosen for this first meeting. Her chestnut hair was neatly arranged beneath her bonnet, and she had practiced a serene expression to mask her inner turmoil. A line of servants stood waiting, and at their head, a tall, formidable figure dressed in black, Duke Arthur Caldwell. His stern countenance betrayed no emotion as he watched the carriage door open. At 35, his face already bore the hard lines of one who had known profound loss. His dark hair was shot with silver at the temples, and his penetrating gray eyes seemed to look through Rosalind rather than at her. Beside him, Lady Beatrice Beaumont, Arthur's late wife's aunt, observed Rosalind with undisguised scrutiny, her gaze sharp and assessing. "Mrs. Vance." Arthur's voice was deep and cold as he offered his hand to help her descend. "Welcome to Blackwood." Rosalind curtsied gracefully. "Your Grace, I am honored by your invitation." "It is no invitation, madam, but a business arrangement. I believe Mr. Abernathy has explained the terms." His bluntness startled her, though she maintained her composure. "He has." "Good. Then we understand each other." Lady Beatrice, standing a few paces away, exchanged a brief, disapproving look with Mr. Abernathy, a silent confirmation of Rosalind's precarious position. The Duke turned to his butler, a prim, elderly man. "Mr. Finch will show you to your chambers. You may rest before dinner." With a curt bow, he turned and strode back into the house, leaving Rosalind standing awkwardly with the servants. "Mrs. Vance." Mr. Finch said with a slight bow, "If you would follow me." As Rosalind followed him through the grand entrance hall, she noted the portraits of severe-looking ancestors lining the walls, the marble floors polished to a mirror shine, and the conspicuous absence of any warmth or comfort. Her chambers were spacious but austere, with heavy draperies and dark furniture. A young woman with kind eyes, Bess, was waiting to help her freshen up. "Bess will attend you during your stay," Mr. Finch explained. "Dinner is served at 7 precisely. The Duke does not tolerate tardiness." "The children, Mr. Finch," Rosalind ventured. "Might I meet them today?" "Master Thomas and Miss Lily usually take their evening meal in the nursery, madam," Mr. Finch replied. "The Duke prefers they maintain a strict schedule." "I see. And how old are they?" "Master Thomas is 7, and Miss Lily has just turned 5. Rosalind's heart clenched. So young to have lost their mother. Do they know of my arrival?" Rosalind asked. "They have been informed that their father is remarrying, yes." His tone revealed nothing of their reaction. When the door closed behind Mr. Finch, Rosalind sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing her mask to slip. What had she agreed to? A marriage without love to a man who clearly resented her very presence. "Will there be anything else, ma'am?" Bess asked, her kind eyes contrasting with the somber atmosphere of the house. "No, thank you. I should like a moment alone." When Bess departed, Rosalind moved to the window. From here she could see the extensive gardens of Blackwood, beautifully maintained, but somehow lacking vibrant life. The symmetrical beds were neat, the paths perfectly graveled, yet no riot of color or spontaneous bloom broke the precise order. In the distance, she spotted two small figures, walking with a woman she presumed to be their governess. Thomas and Lily, the children she was expected to mother, though their father had made it clear she would be nothing more than a convenient presence in their lives. "Courage, Rosalind," she whispered to herself. "You have survived loss before. You will survive this too." The dinner that evening was a stilted affair. The Duke sat at the head of the long table, Rosalind at the opposite end, a distance that seemed to symbolize the chasm between them. Lady Beatrice Beaumont was also present, seated to Arthur's right, her sharp gaze frequently darting between Rosalind and the Duke. Rosalind felt her every movement, every sip of wine, every carefully chosen bite of food was under the strictest scrutiny. "I trust your accommodations are satisfactory," Arthur said after they had been served the first course, his voice formal and devoid of warmth. "Quite, Your Grace. Blackwood Manor is magnificent. It has been in my family for 10 generations." His pride was evident, though his expression remained impassive. "Tomorrow we shall discuss the details of our arrangement more thoroughly. For now, you should know that I expect you to fulfill the duties of Duchess with propriety and dignity." Rosalind set down her soup spoon. "And what of your children, Your Grace? What are your expectations regarding them?" Lady Beatrice subtly shifted her gaze, her eyes narrowing slightly as she absorbed every word of Rosalind's bold inquiry. Something flickered in Arthur's eyes. Pain, perhaps, or anger. "My children have a governess and a nanny. Your role will be to provide a maternal presence when appropriate. They are still recovering from their mother's passing, as are you, it seems." The Duke's jaw tightened. "Let me be clear, Mrs. Vance. I have agreed to this marriage for 2 reasons. My children need a mother figure, and I require an heir. Beyond that, I neither desire nor expect anything resembling affection between us. My heart is buried with my late wife, Eleanor, and it shall remain so." The bluntness of his declaration, though not unexpected, stung nonetheless. Rosalind met his gaze unflinchingly. "You speak with remarkable candor, Your Grace." Lady Beatrice watched, her expression unreadable, but a flicker of pity for Rosalind seemed to cross her stern features. "I prefer honesty to false pretenses. If these terms are unacceptable to you, say so now before the banns are read." Rosalind held his gaze. "I entered into this arrangement with full awareness of its nature. I have no romantic illusions about our union." "Excellent. Then we understand each other." He raised his wine-glass slightly. "To a mutually beneficial arrangement." Rosalind raised her own glass, though she did not drink. "When shall we marry?" "A fortnight from today. A small, private ceremony. There will be no celebration." "As you wish." Lady Beatrice silently raised her own glass in a small, almost imperceptible gesture, a private acknowledgment of the harsh terms. The remainder of the meal passed in near silence. When Arthur finally excused himself to attend to business matters, Rosalind felt she could breathe again. She declined dessert and asked Mr. Finch to be shown back to her chambers. As Bess helped her prepare for bed, Rosalind sank onto a velvet chaise, the enormity of her decision weighing upon her. Her first marriage to Edward had been short, but filled with genuine affection, a stark contrast to the arrangement she had just made. The children, Thomas and Lily, were now her only potential solace, her only hope for finding purpose in this cold, grand house. Sleep eluded her as rain began to patter against the windows. Blackwood Manor creaked and sighed around her, a living entity with secrets hidden in its ancient walls. Somewhere in this vast manor were 2 children who had lost their mother, and a man who had lost his heart. Rosalind had lost much too. Her beloved Edward, her security, her independence. But, unlike Arthur, she had not yet surrendered hope. "Perhaps," she whispered into the darkness, the rain a soft counterpoint to her thoughts. "There is still room for happiness within these walls." But even as she spoke the words, she wondered if they were merely wishful thinking. The following morning arrived with unexpected brightness. The rain having cleared to reveal a crisp autumn day, Rosalind woke early, determined to make a favorable impression on the children she would soon call her own. She selected a simple blue dress that complemented her eyes and asked Bess to arrange her hair in a softer style than was her usual custom. "You look lovely, ma'am," Bess said as she secured the final pin, her young face earnest. "Thank you, Bess." Rosalind's heart quickened with a mixture of hope and nerves. "If I might be so bold, ma'am," Bess continued, her voice lowered, "the children will be taking breakfast in the small parlor this morning. The Duke thought it an appropriate time for your introduction." "Thank you, Bess. I hadn't been informed." "His Grace often makes decisions without much notice," Bess replied with a hint of disapproval in her tone. "If you please, ma'am, the children. They've had a difficult time. Miss Lily barely remembers her mother." "But, Master Thomas—" She hesitated. "Please speak freely." "Master Thomas has been rather withdrawn since Lady Eleanor's passing. He's protective of his sister and wary of change, often reinforced by Lady Beatrice's protective nature." Rosalind nodded. "I understand. Thank you for telling me." The small parlor was bathed in morning light when Rosalind entered. Two children sat at a round table, their backs straight and faces solemn. The governess, a severe-looking woman with spectacles perched on her nose, stood nearby. "Mrs. Vance," the governess acknowledged with a slight curtsy. "I am Miss Everard. Allow me to present Master Thomas and Miss Lily Caldwell." Thomas was a serious-looking boy with his father's gray eyes and dark hair. Lily, fair-haired and delicate, regarded Rosalind with undisguised curiosity. Lady Beatrice Beaumont was present, standing slightly apart near the fireplace, observing Rosalind with a critical, watchful stance, her lips a thin line. "Children, this is Mrs. Vance," Miss Everard continued. "As you know, she will soon be married to your father." Rosalind smiled warmly. "I'm very pleased to meet you both." Thomas's expression remained guarded. "Are you to be our new mother?" The directness of his question caught Rosalind off guard. I would be honored to care for you, but I would never presume to replace your mother." "Our mother is in heaven," Lily announced, her small voice matter-of-fact. "Father says we must not forget her." "And you must not," Rosalind agreed, taking a seat at the table. "She will always be your mother. Perhaps in time, you might think of me as a friend." Lady Beatrice, who had been listening intently, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of approval at Rosalind's sensitive response. Miss Everard cleared her throat. "The children must complete their breakfast before their lessons, Mrs. Vance." "Of course. May I join them?" The governess seemed surprised by the request, but nodded stiffly. Rosalind spread a napkin across her lap and accepted a cup of tea from a footman. "What lessons do you have today?" "Arithmetic and geography," Thomas answered reluctantly. "And I am learning my letters," Lily added with a touch of pride. "How wonderful!" "I was always fond of geography myself," Rosalind said. "Perhaps sometime you might show me what you're learning." Thomas studied her suspiciously. "Father says you lived in London. Is that true?" "Yes, though I was raised in Dorset, not far from the sea." Lily's eyes widened. "Have you seen mermaids?" A small laugh escaped Rosalind. "I'm afraid not, though I've often looked for them." Miss Everard pursed her lips, and Lady Beatrice's expression remained watchful, though she said nothing. "Perhaps not mermaids," Rosalind said gently, noticing Lily's face fall. "But I've seen dolphins leaping in the waves, and once a whale spouting in the distance." Lily gasped with delight, while Thomas's rigid posture relaxed slightly. "Was it terribly large?" he asked, curiosity momentarily overcoming his reserve. "Enormous, like a small island moving through the water." For the remainder of breakfast, Rosalind spoke of the sea and its creatures, careful to balance wonder with factual information that might meet with Miss Everard's approval. By the time the meal ended, Lily was smiling, and Thomas, though still reserved, had asked several thoughtful questions. "Mrs. Vance?" Arthur's voice from the doorway startled them all. He stood watching, his expression unreadable. "Your Grace," Rosalind acknowledged, rising from her seat. "Children, it is time for your lessons," Arthur said. Miss Everard, please escort them to the schoolroom." As the children filed out, Lily turned to wave shyly at Rosalind. Thomas merely nodded, but it felt like progress nonetheless. When they were alone, Arthur approached. "I see you've met my children." "Yes, they're delightful. Lily is so bright, and Thomas is remarkably thoughtful for his age. They are well bred. They miss their mother, Arthur," Rosalind said softly. His expression hardened. "That is not a subject for discussion, Mrs. Vance. You are to provide a feminine presence and ensure they learn proper social graces. Their emotional welfare is not your concern." Rosalind felt a flash of indignation. "With respect, Your Grace, if I am to be their stepmother, their emotional welfare must be my concern." Lady Beatrice, who had lingered in the parlor, watching the exchange, showed a flicker of unexpected interest, her gaze sharpening. Arthur regarded her with surprise, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged. "You speak boldly for someone in your position." "I speak as someone who cares for children's well-being. Surely we can agree on that at least." After a long moment, he inclined his head slightly. "You may spend time with them when their lessons permit. Miss Everard will inform you of appropriate occasions." It was a small victory, but Rosalind would take it. "Thank you. Now, if you would accompany me to the library, we have matters to discuss regarding our marriage contract." The formal arrangements were exactly as Mr. Abernathy had described, cold, practical, and devoid of sentiment. Rosalind and Arthur met in the library, a vast room lined with imposing leather-bound volumes, to sign the marriage contract. Mr. Abernathy was present, confirming the terms. Rosalind would have security and position, a roof over her head, and a respected title. Arthur would have a proper mistress for his household, and the possibility of an heir to carry on the Caldwell name. "You understand that while you will bear the title of Duchess, many aspects of the household will remain under my direct control," Arthur stated as he signed the documents, his hand firm. "I understand my place, Your Grace," Rosalind replied, signing her own name with a steady hand. "Good. I have business in London for the next several days. We shall marry upon my return." Rosalind looked up in surprise. "You're leaving?" "The estate does not run itself, Mrs. Vance. Miss Everard will continue to oversee the children. Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, will acquaint you with the household routines." And with that, he was gone, striding from the library without another glance, leaving Rosalind to navigate her new surroundings alone. She felt a familiar pang of abandonment, reminiscent of the day Edward had passed, leaving her adrift. The following days established a pattern. Rosalind would breakfast with the children, then spend the morning learning the extensive workings of Blackwood from the efficient Mrs. Gable. In the afternoons she would explore the grounds. During one such exploration, she discovered a section of the extensive gardens, walled off and mostly hidden behind a stand of old oaks. It was a rose garden, but wild and overgrown, its once manicured beds now a riot of thorny branches and unkempt foliage. "This was the late Duchess Eleanor's favorite, ma'am," Mrs. Gable explained, her voice softening slightly, a rare occurrence. "She spent hours here. It's been neglected since her passing." Rosalind felt a quiet resolve to tend to it. A hint of past beauty, like a dormant heart, lay beneath the tangled thorns. The days that followed established a quiet rhythm to Rosalind's new existence. She would breakfast with Thomas and Lily, a silent, watchful Miss Everard presiding, before spending her mornings immersed in the intricate workings of Blackwood Manor under the efficient, if somewhat stern, tutelage of Mrs. Gable. In the afternoons, Rosalind would often take tea in the nursery, gradually earning Lily's trust through gentle conversation and shared moments. Lily, with her fair hair and delicate features, would often lean close, her small hands sometimes brushing Rosalind's. Thomas, however, remained more reserved, a serious boy with his father's gray eyes. But Rosalind occasionally caught him watching her with thoughtful consideration, rather than the initial suspicion. The ice around their young hearts, she sensed, was slowly, imperceptibly, beginning to thaw. One evening, seeking a new way to engage the children beyond their structured lessons, Rosalind discovered a magnificent atlas in the sprawling Blackwood Library. Its leather-bound covers were cracked with age, and its pages held detailed maps of distant lands and vast oceans. Excited by its potential, she brought it to the nursery. "Look, Thomas," she said, her voice soft, pointing to markings on the ocean expanse. "This shows the whale migration routes. They travel thousands of miles each year, from the icy poles to warmer waters." Thomas's eyes, usually so guarded, widened with genuine interest. "Father never showed me this," he admitted, his tone a quiet revelation. "Perhaps he was saving it until you were older," Rosalind suggested, a gentle smile touching her lips. "But I think you're quite capable of understanding it now." From the corner where she played with her dolls, Lily called out, "Tell us about the mermaids again." Miss Everard, darning by the fire, pursed her lips in disapproval, but Rosalind merely chuckled softly. "Miss Charlotte," Miss Everard admonished, her voice crisp, "we do not speak of such fanciful nonsense. There are no mermaids." Rosalind noticed how the little girl's face fell, a familiar sadness clouding her delicate features. "Perhaps not mermaids," Rosalind said gently, her gaze lingering on Lily, "but I've seen dolphins leaping in the waves, not far from where I grew up. And once, a whale spouting in the distance." Lily gasped with delight, her earlier disappointment forgotten. Even Thomas's rigid posture relaxed slightly, his curiosity momentarily overcoming his reserve. "Was it terribly large?" he asked, his voice a low murmur. "Enormous," Rosalind replied, her eyes sparkling, "like a small island moving through the water." For the remainder of breakfast, Rosalind spoke of the sea and its creatures, weaving tales of wonder while carefully balancing them with factual information that might meet with Miss Everard's approval. Unbeknownst to her, Lady Beatrice, having quietly entered the nursery, stood near the doorway, a slight unreadable expression on her face as she observed Rosalind's captivating storytelling. By the time the meal ended, Lily was smiling, and Thomas, though still reserved, had asked several thoughtful questions. Lady Beatrice, before quietly departing, offered a barely perceptible nod, a flicker of something akin to curiosity in her sharp eyes. As the days passed, small but significant changes began to occur within the nursery and the broader household. Lily, once solemn and quiet, began to seek Rosalind out more frequently. She would bring her carefully rendered drawings of flowers and fantastical beasts, whispering secrets about her dolls, adventures, and the mischievous sprites she imagined lived in the manor's shadows. Thomas, ever the more cautious of the two, remained reserved, yet Rosalind would occasionally catch him watching her with thoughtful consideration, rather than the initial suspicion that had clouded his young eyes. These small, unspoken gestures, a shared glance, a whispered confidence, a lingering observation, signaled a growing bond, a fragile thread of trust, slowly weaving itself between Rosalind and the children. She cherished each one, understanding them as quiet triumphs in the cold, formal expanse of Blackwood. One crisp afternoon, while taking a solitary walk through the estate gardens, Rosalind discovered Thomas in a secluded, overgrown corner near the old orchard. He was sitting on the damp earth, his small hands diligently attempting to construct a miniature boat from sticks and leaves. The effort was earnest, but the materials were ill-suited, and the fragile vessel kept collapsing. "That's quite clever," Rosalind remarked, kneeling beside him, despite the potential damage to her carefully kept skirts. Her presence didn't startle him as it once might have, but if you use bark for the hull, it might float better. Thomas looked up, skeptical. "Do you know about boats?" he asked, a hint of surprise in his voice. "My father taught me to make them when I was about your age," she confessed, her voice soft with memory. "We would race them in the stream near our cottage." Just then, Lady Beatrice, on her own constitutional, passed by the orchard path. She paused, her gaze resting first on the child, then on Rosalind, a fleeting hint of curiosity softening her usually stern features before she continued on her way. Thomas seemed to consider this revelation carefully. "Your father wasn't a duke," he stated, his young voice a mix of observation and question. Rosalind smiled, a gentle nostalgic curve of her lips. "No, he wasn't. He was a country doctor, not grand at all by society's measures, but very wise and kind." She paused, a wistful note entering her tone. "And my first husband, Edward, he was much the same. A good man, though his life was also cut short too soon." Her words hung in the air, an unspoken parallel to Arthur's own profound loss. Thomas studied her, his brow furrowed in thought, absorbing this glimpse into her past, a past that echoed his own and his father's in its quiet grief. The shared understanding, though subtle, deepened the nascent connection between them, a fragile bridge built on shared humanity rather than societal expectation. The boy's eyes, so like Arthur's in their gray intensity, filled suddenly with tears, which he wiped away with fierce, almost angry determination. "I don't remember her face anymore," he whispered, his voice thick with a child's raw grief. "Sometimes I try, but I can't see it clearly." Rosalind's heart ached for him, a familiar pang of sympathy for the profound, confusing sorrow of a child who has lost a parent too soon. She recognized the crushing weight of a memory fading, the terror of losing the very image of love. She understood his pain, for she too had wrestled with the elusive details of a beloved face in the quiet hours of the night. "May I show you something?" Rosalind asked softly, her voice a gentle balm. She reached into the pocket of her dress and withdrew a small, intricately carved silver locket. Inside, nestled beneath a crystal cover, was a miniature portrait of her late husband, Edward, his kind eyes and gentle smile captured for eternity. "I keep this with me," she explained, holding it out for Thomas to see, "to help me remember. When I miss him, I look at his face, and it brings me comfort." Thomas touched the portrait with a gentle, curious finger, his tear-filled eyes fixed on the image. "Perhaps your father has a miniature of your mother, Eleanor, that you could keep," Rosalind suggested, her gaze soft. Lady Beatrice, who had paused once more, lingered a little longer this time. Her sharp eyes seemed to soften almost imperceptibly as she witnessed Rosalind's genuine empathy and thoughtful gesture, a maternal act that transcended any formal role. Thomas looked up, his gaze solemn. "Father put all her things away," he revealed, his voice barely audible. "He doesn't like us to speak of her." Rosalind's heart clenched at the implication of Arthur's enduring grief and his attempt to shield his children, however misguidedly, from his own pain. "Sometimes," she said carefully, choosing her words with precision, "when people are very sad, they find it difficult to speak of those they've lost. It doesn't mean they've forgotten or stopped loving them. It's just their way of coping with a very great sorrow." The boy regarded her solemnly, processing her words. "Would you ask Father if I might have a picture of Mother?" he asked, a fragile hope in his eyes. "I will," Rosalind promised, her voice firm with resolve, knowing this would be a delicate request, given Arthur's previous warnings. That evening, seated at her small writing desk, Rosalind composed a letter to Arthur in London. She carefully described the children's activities, their progress in their lessons, and Lily's growing exuberance. At the end, after much internal debate, she added a tentative request, her pen hovering over the fine stationery. "William has expressed a desire for a miniature portrait of his late mother, Eleanor. I believe it would bring him great comfort to have her image close. Might I have your permission to provide him with one?" She sealed the letter, a knot of hope and anxiety tightening in her stomach. Would Arthur see this as another overstep, an intrusion into his carefully constructed wall of grief? Or would the quiet desperation in his son's eyes reach him, even across the miles? 3 days later, a discreet package arrived from London. There was no note, no acknowledgement of Rosalind's request, but the contents themselves were answer enough. Inside a small velvet box lay a miniature portrait of a beautiful woman, her features delicate, her dark hair mirroring Thomas's, her solemn gray eyes so strikingly like his and Lily's. It was Eleanor. Rosalind's heart gave a little lurch. She brought it to the nursery. "Thomas, Lily," she said, her voice soft with emotion. Thomas's face, upon seeing the portrait, transformed with a raw mixture of joy and grief. Tears welled in his eyes, but this time they were not of confusion, but of recognition and a profound, aching relief. "This is exactly how I remember her," he whispered, tracing the painted face with a trembling finger. Lily, peering over her brother's shoulder, regarded the image with wide-eyed curiosity, sharing in the quiet solemnity of the moment. That night, for the first time since Rosalind's arrival, Thomas allowed her to tuck him into bed alongside Lily. It was a small gesture, but one that spoke volumes of his growing comfort and trust. "Will you tell us a story?" Lily pleaded, her voice already heavy with sleep. "Not tonight, my dear. It's quite late." Miss Everard interjected from her chair by the fire, her tone a predictable blend of firmness and resignation. "Just a short one," Rosalind suggested gently, meeting Miss Everard's gaze with a soft, persistent smile. "About the sea, perhaps." Miss Everard sighed, a sound that conveyed her weariness more than true objection, and retreated to her darning, accepting Rosalind's gentle influence. Rosalind began to tell them a story of brave lighthouse keepers, their lonely vigils ensuring ships found their way home through treacherous, storm-tossed waters. She spoke of the comfort of a steady beacon, the courage it took to stand firm against the vast, unpredictable ocean. As she spoke, Lily's eyelids grew heavy, and she nestled closer against Rosalind's arm, already half asleep. Even Thomas, usually so alert, seemed peacefully drowsy, his breathing deep and even. "Good night, dear ones," Rosalind whispered, tucking the blankets more securely around them, her heart full. As she turned to leave, Thomas's voice, a soft, sleepy murmur, stopped her. "Rosalind?" "Yes, Thomas? Thank you for the portrait of Mother." A warm smile touched Rosalind's lips. "You're very welcome. Father arrives home tomorrow," Thomas added, his expression serious once more, the warmth of the story fading as reality returned. "Yes, I know," Rosalind replied, her smile softening. "Will you still visit us in the nursery once you're married?" he asked, a hint of anxiety in his voice. The question held the weight of a child's fear of abandonment, a fear Rosalind understood all too well. "Every day," she promised, her voice unwavering. "If you wish it." Thomas nodded, seemingly satisfied by her unwavering assurance. "Good night, Rosalind." It was a small exchange, a simple promise, but in that moment, Rosalind knew she had found a fragile, yet profound footing in this grand, cold house. As Rosalind left the nursery, making her way back to her chambers, she realized that in just a week, these two children, Thomas and Lily, had claimed a piece of her heart, their quiet acceptance, their burgeoning trust, the simple gift of Thomas's "thank you" for his mother's portrait. It meant more to her than any societal position or promised security. Tomorrow she would marry their father, a man who had explicitly stated he had no interest in her beyond her practical value to his household, a man whose heart, he claimed, was buried with his late wife. Yet, as she prepared for bed, extinguishing the candles one by one, Rosalind found herself hoping that perhaps, in time, Arthur might come to see her as more than just a convenient arrangement. For the children's sake, if nothing else, she wished for some measure of warmth between them. The thought was still with her when she finally drifted to sleep, the children's trusting faces the last image in her mind. The day of the wedding dawned cold and clear, with frost etching delicate, crystalline patterns on the window panes of Blackwood Manor. Rosalind stood in her chambers, allowing Bess, her kind-eyed maid, to fasten the dozens of tiny buttons on the back of her wedding gown. It was a modest creation of ivory silk, chosen for its simple elegance rather than ostentation, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Her chestnut hair was arranged simply, adorned only with a small spray of white roses, a gift from the conservatory. "You look beautiful, ma'am," Bess said softly, stepping back to survey her work, a genuine warmth in her voice. "Thank you, Bess." Rosalind's voice was steady, though her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her lace gloves. A soft knock at the door revealed Mrs. Gable, the efficient housekeeper. Her usually stern expression softened slightly as she looked at Rosalind. "The Duke has returned, madam. The ceremony will begin in half an hour." "I shall be ready." When the door closed behind Mrs. Gable, Rosalind moved to the window, gazing out at the frost-covered gardens, beautiful in their stark winter stillness. Was she making a terrible mistake? The question, like a cold draught, crept into her heart. Arthur, she knew, remained as cold and distant as the winter landscape before her. He was a man of stone, walled off by grief. But the children had begun to warm to her, their small hands reaching, their soft voices a balm to her soul. It was for them, she reminded herself, for their stability, their need for a maternal presence, for a hope of happiness she could offer. "Rosalind Vance," she whispered to her reflection in the glass, her voice firming, "you made your choice. For better or worse, this is your path now." She straightened her shoulders, drawing strength from the quiet determination within her heart, a commitment to those young souls who had already claimed a piece of her. The private chapel at Blackwood Manor was a small, ancient stone building nestled discreetly within the estate's sprawling grounds. As Rosalind approached on the arm of Mr. Abernathy, her late husband's solicitor, she saw only a handful of people gathered inside. The Duke's solicitor, Mrs. Gable, Mr. Finch the butler, and the vicar waiting patiently at the altar. And there stood Arthur Caldwell, Duke of Blackwood, his tall figure imposing in formal attire, a stark silhouette against the chapel's stained glass. His expression was inscrutable, betraying no emotion as she walked slowly toward him. The ceremony was brief and perfunctory, devoid of any warmth or sentiment. They exchanged the necessary vows, their voices echoing in the near-empty chapel. When the Duke placed the simple gold band on her finger, rather than the elaborate family heirloom she might have expected, his touch was impersonal, as if completing a business transaction. Lady Beatrice, seated prominently in the front pew, watched the entire proceeding with a solemn, unreadable expression, her gaze unwavering as she observed Rosalind. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the vicar declared, his words hanging in the crisp chapel air, a definitive pronouncement of her new reality. There was no kiss, merely a formal bow from the Duke before he offered his arm, a stiff, unyielding gesture to lead her from the chapel. "Your Grace," the vicar called after them, a slight cough preceding his words. "The registry requires your signatures." They returned to sign the heavy leather-bound book. Rosalind's new name, Rosalind Caldwell, Duchess of Blackwood, appeared foreign to her eyes as she wrote it for the very first time, a stark reminder of the profound, impersonal transformation her life had undergone in a single, cold ceremony. Outside, to Rosalind's surprise and quiet delight, the children waited with Miss Everard. Lily, her small face alight with excitement, immediately ran forward, a small, carefully arranged bouquet of houseflowers clutched proudly in her hand. "These are for you," she announced, presenting them to Rosalind. "Thomas helped me pick them." Deeply touched by this innocent, heartfelt gesture, Rosalind knelt, ignoring the chill of the morning air, to accept the gift. "They're beautiful, Lily. Thank you both." Thomas hung back slightly, watching cautiously, but a small, proud smile played on his lips. Lady Beatrice, who had emerged from the chapel to observe the scene, stood a little apart, her gaze fixed on the children. For a fleeting moment, as Lily presented her gift, a hint of genuine affection softened the older woman's usually critical eyes. Thomas, his usual solemnity returning, stepped forward. "Does this mean we should call you Mother now?" The directness of his question, though innocent, sent a ripple of tension through the small group. Rosalind glanced up at Arthur, whose jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly at the question. She met Thomas's gaze, offering him a gentle, reassuring smile. "You may call me Rosalind," she said softly, "or whatever feels comfortable to you." Miss Everard, sensing the delicate nature of the moment, and perhaps eager to restore order, cleared her throat. "Come, children," she interrupted, her voice firm. "Her Grace will want to rest after the ceremony." "Actually," Rosalind said, rising gracefully to her feet, her gaze meeting Miss Everard's with quiet resolve, "I would be delighted if the children would join us for luncheon." She then turned to Arthur, her expression expectant. "If that meets with your approval, of course, Your Grace." After a moment's hesitation, a pause that seemed to stretch interminably, Arthur gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. "Very well, Miss Everard. Please prepare the children." Miss Everard, clearly surprised by this deviation from the Duke's usual rigid schedule, bowed stiffly and led the children, who were now beaming with excitement, back towards the house. It was a small triumph for Rosalind, a subtle assertion of her role and a clear signal of her intent to bring warmth to Blackwood. As they walked back to the main house, the Duke maintained a careful, formal distance between them, his presence as imposing and unyielding as the ancient stones of Blackwood Manor itself. "I trust your accommodations have been satisfactory during my absence," he said formally, his voice devoid of personal inflection. "Yes, thank you, Your Grace." "Everyone has been most kind," Rosalind replied, her tone equally composed. "And the children?" he continued, his gaze unwavering as he looked straight ahead. "Mrs. Gable informs me you've spent considerable time with them." Rosalind detected a note of something in his voice. Was it disapproval, or merely a detached curiosity? She couldn't quite tell, but the implied scrutiny was clear. "They're wonderful children, Your Grace," Rosalind replied, choosing her words carefully. "Lily is so imaginative, and Thomas has such a keen mind." She paused, then ventured into more delicate territory. "Thomas, in particular, misses his mother greatly." Arthur's step faltered ever so slightly, a nearly imperceptible break in his rigid stride. Rosalind pressed on, emboldened by the small sign of emotion. "Thank you for sending the portrait, Your Grace. It meant the world to him." Arthur recovered quickly, his expression hardening once more. It was a reasonable request. He dismissed, his tone curt, as if regretting the brief moment of vulnerability. He clearly wished to close the subject. Luncheon was a stilted affair, the formal setting of the vast dining hall doing little to encourage easy conversation. Though the children's presence provided some relief from the oppressive tension, their youthful chatter felt small and vulnerable in the echoing space. Lily chattered happily about the flowers she had chosen, while Thomas observed the adults with his characteristic thoughtfulness. "Will there be cake?" Lily asked suddenly, her small voice cutting through the silence, entirely innocent of the impact her words would have. "Mother always said weddings should have cake." A painful silence fell over the table, thick and immediate. Arthur's knuckles whitened around his fork, his jaw tightening visibly. "Charlotte!" Miss Everard admonished, her voice sharp with alarm. "That is quite enough." Rosalind intervened gently, placing her hand on Lily's arm. "There is no cake today, my dear. But perhaps we might ask cook to prepare something special for dessert." Lady Beatrice, who had been observing the entire interaction with her usual keen gaze, looked at Rosalind then, a fleeting hint of approval in her eyes, a silent acknowledgment of Rosalind's delicate and compassionate handling of the painful memory. "I would appreciate it if you would not make promises to my children without consulting me first," Arthur said, his voice clipped, his gaze fixed and cold. Rosalind had merely suggested a special dessert, but in his mind, it was a dangerous precedent. "It begins with dessert and ends with them growing attached, expecting things I cannot provide." His knuckles, still white around his fork, betrayed a deeper agitation than mere irritation. "You mean affection?" Rosalind asked, her voice calm despite the tremor she felt within. His eyes flashed. "I mean false hopes. They have already lost one mother." "I will not have them believing in fairy tales about happy families." Rosalind set down her napkin, her own indignation rising. "With respect, Your Grace, they are children. They deserve whatever happiness we can give them." Lady Beatrice, who had lingered in the dining hall, a silent, watchful presence throughout the luncheon, subtly shifted her gaze between Arthur and Rosalind, absorbing every word, her expression unreadable. Arthur rose abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. They deserve stability and structure, not emotional indulgence. "And why must those things be mutually exclusive?" Rosalind challenged. "Why can they not have both security and love?" Arthur's jaw tightened, his face a mask of pain. Rosalind was only just beginning to discern. "Because love is transient, Your Grace. It deceives, and then it destroys. I will not build my children's future on such a fragile foundation." With that, he strode abruptly from the room, leaving Rosalind alone at the vast dining table on her wedding day, the silence deafening, the echoes of his bitter declaration hanging heavy in the air. Rosalind remained seated, stunned by the raw vulnerability hidden beneath his harsh words, and the profound loneliness of her new reality. The weeks that followed established a rhythm to their unusual marriage. Rosalind, with her quiet competence, gradually took over management of the household, proving herself both capable and efficient under the watchful eye of Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper. Arthur retreated to his study for most of the day, emerging only for formal dinners where conversation remained painfully stilted, a chasm of unspoken emotions stretching between them. At night, they retired to separate chambers, the Duke having made it clear that, while he expected an heir eventually, he was not yet prepared to fulfill that aspect of their arrangement. Yet, Rosalind found her true purpose, and indeed her joy, in the hours spent with the children. Under her gentle guidance, Lily blossomed, her natural exuberance finding appropriate outlets. Thomas remained more reserved, but increasingly sought Rosalind's company, particularly in the library, where they would pore over maps and natural history volumes together, his curiosity a quiet bridge between them. One evening, as winter tightened its grip on Blackwood Manor, Rosalind was reading to the children in the nursery, their faces illuminated by the warm glow of the fire, when the door opened unexpectedly. Arthur stood in the doorway, his tall frame a stark silhouette against the dimly lit corridor. "Father!" Lily exclaimed, jumping up to greet him, her small voice echoing in the cozy space. "Good evening, Lily," Arthur replied, patting her head awkwardly, his gaze moving to Rosalind, a hint of surprise in his gray eyes. He was clearly uncomfortable, his presence incongruous with the comfortable, informal scene before him. "I apologize for the interruption," Arthur said, his gaze still on Rosalind. "I was not aware you were here." "We were just reading about explorers," Thomas volunteered, his voice more animated than usual. "Rosalind knows about Captain Cook's voyages." Arthur's eyebrow raised slightly at the familiar use of her name, but he made no comment. "May Father join us?" Lily asked, tugging at Arthur's coat, her eyes wide with hope. Rosalind saw him stiffen, clearly uncomfortable in the casual setting. "I'm sure your father has important matters to attend to, Lily." Rosalind intervened gently. "Actually," Arthur said, surprising them all, "I believe I can spare a few minutes." He lowered himself stiffly into a chair, his large frame seeming to swallow the nursery furniture, an unusual guest in their intimate circle. "Please continue," Arthur said to Rosalind, his gaze steady as she resumed reading. Rosalind described Cook's navigation techniques, acutely aware of his eyes on her. Unexpectedly, Arthur interjected, explaining celestial navigation in terms the children could readily understand, his voice losing some of its stiffness as he spoke of the stars. "Father knows about the stars," Thomas told Rosalind, a note of pride in his voice. "He taught me the constellations last summer." "Did he?" Rosalind smiled, glimpsing for the first time the loving father beneath the Duke's forbidding exterior. "Perhaps when spring comes, we might all observe them together." Arthur made no commitment, but neither did he dismiss the suggestion, a small spark of shared interest passing between them. When the children were finally tucked into bed, Rosalind and Arthur walked together down the corridor, the silence between them less strained than usual. "You're good with them," he said abruptly, his voice a low rumble in the quiet hall. The unexpected compliment caught Rosalind off guard. "Thank you. They make it easy. They're wonderful children," she ventured carefully. "They miss their mother." Arthur's expression hardened, the brief moment of warmth receding. "They were not always so. After their mother died," he stopped, seeming to regret having raised the subject. Rosalind, observing his renewed pain, decided to push gently. "Children are remarkably resilient, but they need guidance through their grief." "And you believe I failed to provide that?" Arthur interrupted, his voice sharp, a defensive edge returning. "Not at all. I merely meant I have done everything in my power to protect them from further pain," he continued, his jaw tightening, "including this marriage of convenience." Rosalind met his gaze steadily. "And yet you deny them the comfort of speaking about their mother, of remembering her openly. You overstep your grace." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, her voice unwavering. But I speak only out of concern for Thomas and Lily. Surely we can agree on that at least." The closed door of her chambers loomed behind her, a symbol of the emotional distance still between them. Arthur stood rigidly, internal conflict evident in the tightness of his jaw, his eyes shadowed with pain. "My wife, my first wife Eleanor, was everything to them," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "To me. When she died, something in this house died with her. I cannot resurrect it, nor would I try." "I would never presume to replace her," Rosalind said gently, her empathy overriding her earlier indignation. "But perhaps in time we might build something new for the children's sake." He looked at her then, really looked at her, his penetrating gray eyes searching her face as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "You are not what I expected, Rosalind Vance. Caldwell." Rosalind corrected softly, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips. "Rosalind Caldwell." A flicker of something. Recognition, perhaps even a hint of acceptance, crossed his face. "Yes. Good night, Lady Blackwood." He inclined his head slightly, a formal gesture that nonetheless felt different, imbued with a new, subtle intimacy. "Good night, Arthur," Rosalind replied, using his first name with a quiet confidence that surprised even herself. As he turned and walked away, she felt a flutter of warmth in her chest, a nascent hope amidst the lingering formality. As winter deepened, subtle changes appeared at Blackwood Manor. Arthur began to join Rosalind and the children occasionally for tea in the afternoon drawing-room. He would listen as Rosalind read to the children, sometimes adding his own knowledge to the stories, his voice less rigid than before. Lady Beatrice, though still maintaining her distance and her usual formal composure, noted these changes from her customary seat by the fire. A thoughtful expression would sometimes cross her face as she observed Arthur's quiet contributions, a hint of surprise in her sharp eyes. The warmth of the fire, once battling the coldness of the room, now seemed to embrace a burgeoning fragile domesticity. One afternoon, to everyone's astonishment, Arthur brought a wooden toy ship he had carved for Thomas. "It's not very good," he said gruffly, presenting it to his son. Thomas's face lit up with pure joy. "Did you make this, Father? Truly?" "Truly I did, though it's been many years since I attempted such craftsmanship." "It's magnificent," the boy declared, examining every detail with reverence. Rosalind caught Arthur's eye over Thomas's head, and for a breathless moment they shared a quiet understanding, a genuine smile that felt like the first true connection between them. Lady Beatrice, who had been observing from a nearby armchair, saw it too, a subtle nod of acknowledgment on her usually stern face. Yet for every step forward, there seemed to be a retreat. Arthur remained fiercely private, rebuffing any attempt to discuss his late wife, Eleanor, or his own lingering feelings of loss. His moments of warmth in the nursery or at tea were invariably followed by periods of withdrawal, as if he feared letting too much light in, or perhaps feared the pain that openness might bring. Rosalind observed this duality with a pensive heart, understanding that his progress was not a linear path, but an ongoing, internal battle with the weight of his grief. Christmas approached, bringing with it the question of traditions and celebrations. Rosalind, ever mindful of the children's joy, suggested decorating the Great Hall. "Blackwood has not celebrated Christmas since my wife's passing," Arthur informed her coldly, his expression shuddered. "The children receive gifts, of course, but there are no festivities." "But surely some observance would bring them joy," Rosalind pressed gently. "Not extravagant, just some greenery, perhaps a Yule log." "My decision is final," Arthur stated, his tone brooking no argument. Lady Beatrice, who was present in the drawing-room, sewing by the fire, nodded in agreement with Arthur's decision, subtly reinforcing his grief-driven stance with her silent approval. Rosalind might have accepted his verdict had she not later overheard Lily asking Thomas if Father Christmas would find them this year. "Don't be silly," Thomas replied with the world-weary wisdom of his 7 years. "Father doesn't permit Christmas at Blackwood, not since Mother died." The sadness in his voice, so profound and resigned, spurred Rosalind to action. It was not enough for the children to simply receive gifts. They needed the spirit, the warmth, the joy of the season. She would not let Arthur's grief overshadow their childhood any longer. That evening, Rosalind knocked on the door of Arthur's study, a liberty she had rarely taken before, a boundary she was now determined to cross. "Enter," came his voice, gruff and preoccupied. She found him at his desk, surrounded by estate ledgers, his brow furrowed in concentration. He did not look up from his work. "Forgive the interruption, Your Grace." "What is it?" he asked, his pen pausing briefly over a column of figures. Rosalind closed the door behind her, the soft click echoing in the hushed room, signaling her resolve. "I wish to discuss Christmas arrangements," Rosalind stated, her voice steady. Arthur finally looked up, a warning in his eyes. "I believe I made my position clear." "You did," Rosalind acknowledged. "But I must speak on behalf of the children." "My children," he corrected, his voice sharp. "Our children," she replied gently, holding his gaze. "At least in the eyes of society and the law. And they deserve a Christmas." Arthur rose to his feet, anger evident in the set of his shoulders. "They have never complained." "Because they dare not," Rosalind interrupted, her own passion rising. "They have learned to suppress their desires rather than risk your disapproval. You presume too much about matters you do not understand." "Then help me understand," she challenged, her voice unwavering. "Why deny them something as simple as Christmas decorations? What possible harm could it do?" Arthur turned away from her, his shoulders stiff. "It was my wife's favorite holiday," he said, his voice suddenly raw with emotion, a vulnerability Rosalind had rarely witnessed. She transformed Blackwood each December. Every garland, every candle was placed by her hand. The children would help her decorate the tree, and she would. He stopped, turning away completely, his voice catching. "I cannot bear to see pale imitations of her traditions." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken pain. Rosalind's anger softened as understanding dawned, a profound empathy replacing her indignation. "You're not protecting the children from pain," she said quietly, moving closer to him. "You're protecting yourself." His shoulders stiffened further. "You know nothing of my pain." "I know what it is to lose someone you love," she replied, her voice gentle yet firm. "My husband Edward was not a grand man like yourself, but he was kind and good, and when he died, I thought the world had ended." She did not touch him, but her presence was a quiet strength. "I know the desolation." "Do you think I don't know that?" Arthur said, turning back to her, his expression a battlefield of emotion. "Every morning I wake and remember she is gone. Every night I retire alone with that same knowledge. Yet I rise. I manage the estate. I ensure my children's future. I continue." "Existing is not living, Arthur," Rosalind said gently, her voice a balm to his raw pain. "And neither is punishing yourself by denying joy, not only to yourself, but to Thomas and Lily. The world continues, and so must we. So must they." He studied her face as if searching for an answer to a question he dared not ask, his eyes intense in the flickering candlelight. After a long moment, a profound quiet descending between them, Arthur's rigid posture softened almost imperceptibly. His gaze, though still intense, held a new vulnerability. "You truly care for them, don't you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper, the question a pivotal point in their evolving relationship. "I do," Rosalind affirmed, meeting his gaze unflinchingly. "Very much." He sighed, a heavy, weary sound that seemed to release some of the tension he carried. His eyes, though still shadowed with grief, held a glimmer of something akin to hope. "What would you propose?" Arthur asked. The concession a small but significant victory that made Rosalind's heart flutter with cautious triumph. "Something modest. Greenery, a Yule log, perhaps a small tree in the great hall." "Very well," he conceded, the words sounding foreign on his lips. "Thank you, Arthur." Rosalind felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Edmund," he said unexpectedly, his voice low. Rosalind blinked, surprised. "When we are alone," he continued, a faint flush coloring his cheekbones, "you might call me Edmund." The name, his true first name, felt like a precious, fragile gift. "Thank you, Edmund," she replied, her voice soft with genuine emotion. The Christmas preparations brought a new energy to Blackwood Manor. Under Rosalind's gentle direction, the servants hung simple evergreen garlands in the main hall. A Yule log, carefully selected, was prepared with traditional herbs, filling the air with a comforting scent. Rosalind herself crafted small, thoughtful gifts for the children and staff, working late into the night on her creations. To her surprise, Arthur, now Edmund, did not retreat from these activities, but began to participate in small, meaningful ways. He approved the placement of candles in the windows, a tradition from his own childhood. He instructed the groundskeeper to cut the finest spruce for the great hall, where a modest tree would be decorated. Lady Beatrice, observing the bustling scene, watched for the hint of surprise in her eyes at Edmund's unexpected involvement, her own customary reserve momentarily softened by the burgeoning festive spirit. On Christmas Eve, the four of them, Rosalind, Edmund, Thomas, and Lily, gathered to adorn the modest tree in the great hall. Lily, beside herself with excitement, carefully placed glass ornaments on the lower branches. Thomas, more reserved but clearly pleased, helped his father with the higher decorations. Rosalind watched them together, father and son working side by side, and felt a profound sense of rightness. "This one was Mother's favorite," Thomas said suddenly, holding up a delicate glass bird. Rosalind held her breath, waiting for Edmund's reaction. After a moment's hesitation, he knelt beside his son, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes," he said softly. "She loved birds." "Do you remember how she would feed them in the garden?" Thomas nodded, his eyes shining. "She let me help." "Perhaps," Edmund suggested, his voice still rough, but with a new lightness, "you might like to continue that tradition this winter." The boy's face lit up. Rosalind and Lady Beatrice, who had quietly observed the scene from a nearby settee, exchanged a look of quiet understanding, witnessing Arthur's breakthrough in acknowledging his late wife. That night, as they sat by the fire in the drawing room after the children had gone to bed, Rosalind found the courage to broach the subject. "Thank you," she said simply, "for allowing Thomas to speak of his mother." Edmund stared into the flames, a pensive look on his face. "I thought I was protecting them by not speaking of her. I believed the memories would only cause them pain." "Sometimes memories are all we have, Edmund," Rosalind replied, her voice soft, "and sharing them can ease the burden of loss." He looked at her then, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight, vulnerable and open in a way she had not seen before. Her name was Caroline. "We were childhood friends before we were sweethearts. When she died in childbirth, our third child, who also did not survive, I thought I would never feel anything but pain again." Rosalind reached out impulsively, placing her hand gently over his. He did not pull away. That night, as Rosalind and Arthur sat by the fire after the children had gone to bed, a comfortable silence settled between them, a luxury once unimaginable. Rosalind was still pondering Arthur's raw confession from earlier. Arthur stared into the dancing flames, a pensive expression on his face. Finally, he turned to her, his gaze intense, reflecting the firelight. "Caroline would have liked you," he said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. "She would have approved of how you care for the children." Rosalind's heart swelled at his words, a warmth spreading through her chest. "That means a great deal to me, Arthur," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. Their eyes met across the flickering light, and in that breathless moment, Rosalind felt something profound shift between them. A thawing of the ice that had encased his heart for so long, a silent acknowledgement that a part of his past, the cherished memory of his late wife, could coexist with the burgeoning hope of their present. Christmas Day dawned with a gentle, if crisp, warmth that seemed to emanate from within Blackwood Manor itself. The day was a testament to Rosalind's quiet efforts and Arthur's nascent willingness to embrace joy. Simple celebrations filled the house. Gifts were exchanged by the crackling fire, the children's excited chatter, a sweet melody in the grand hall. A special meal was shared, not in the cavernous dining room, but in the smaller, cozier family parlor, where carols sung by the servants echoed softly from the hall. Throughout it all, Arthur remained present, engaged in a way Rosalind had rarely seen. His eyes, though still carrying a trace of lingering melancholy, frequently found hers, a silent communication of shared happiness. The children, Thomas and Lily, were clearly delighted, their faces bright with the magic of the festive atmosphere. That night, after the children had finally been coaxed to bed, Arthur escorted Rosalind to her chamber door, as had become their quiet custom. But tonight he hesitated, not offering the usual formal good night. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion, his gaze fixed on her. "For bringing Christmas back to Blackwood. It was a gift." Rosalind merely nodded, her own emotions too complex to voice easily. He took a step closer, his eyes searching hers. "I have not been kind to you, Rosalind," he continued, his admission raw and unexpected. "You deserved better than the cold arrangement I offered." Rosalind's heart ached at his self-reproach, but she shook her head gently. "You have been fair, Arthur," she said softly, "and increasingly kind." Arthur's gaze intensified, a flicker of something new and vulnerable in its depths. "You have changed this household," he went on, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Changed me, perhaps." Rosalind's breath caught in her throat, her heart quickening. He admitted, "I find myself looking forward to our conversations, to your company." The words hung in the quiet corridor, a confession of burgeoning affection that resonated deep within Rosalind. "As do I, Arthur," she whispered in return, her own feelings no longer a secret she wished to keep. The air between them crackled with an unspoken tension, a yearning that had been carefully suppressed for months, now on the verge of breaking free. He stepped closer, close enough for her to feel the warmth emanating from him, to almost anticipate the brush of his hand. His hand rose, as if drawn by an invisible thread to touch her face, then faltered, falling back to his side. The hesitation was palpable, a testament to the years of guarded grief. "I should bid you good night," he murmured, his voice strained. "Yes," Rosalind whispered in return, though every fiber of her being screamed for him to stay, to bridge the remaining distance between them. He bowed stiffly, a ghost of his former formality, and then turned away. They parted, leaving unspoken desires and a profound sense of longing hanging heavy in the quiet corridor, the air thick with what remained unsaid yet deeply felt. As winter reluctantly yielded to the first tentative signs of spring, the atmosphere at Blackwood Manor continued to warm, mirroring the subtle shifts in the landscape outside. The austere, formal air that had once pervaded the halls began to dissipate, replaced by a gentle, burgeoning sense of life. Arthur increasingly sought Rosalind's company, not only for discussions concerning the children or the sprawling estate, but for conversation, for companionship itself. They began to take walks together in the gardens, when the weather permitted, the thawing ground pushing forth the first green shoots. They would discuss books they had read, sharing stories of their childhoods, a quiet intimacy weaving between them. Lady Beatrice, ever the watchful observer, occasionally spotted them from a drawing-room window, a thoughtful, unreadable look on her face, a hint of curiosity replacing her usual skepticism. Yet despite the deepening emotional connection, physical intimacy remained conspicuously absent from their marriage. Arthur had not revisited the subject of an heir, and while their bond grew stronger, he maintained a careful, almost imperceptible, physical distance. Rosalind, remembering Mrs. Gable's words, began to actively tend the neglected rose garden. It had once been Caroline's favorite, a vibrant splash of color now choked by thorny overgrowth. With gardening gloves and shears, Rosalind pruned the wild bushes, nurtured the struggling roots, and cleared the debris that had accumulated over years of disuse. During their walks, Arthur would sometimes pause by the edge of this forgotten corner, his gaze lingering on Rosalind as she worked. He occasionally offered a practical suggestion about soil or sunlight, or silently helped clear a particularly stubborn patch of weeds. As the days lengthened, the first signs of new growth appeared on the thorny branches, tiny emerald buds promising future blooms. The revitalized garden became a powerful symbol of the growing life within Blackwood Manor, mirroring the slow, deliberate healing that was taking root in the hearts of its inhabitants. One evening in late March, a violent storm descended upon Blackwood Manor. Thunder rattled the ancient windows, shaking the very foundations of the house, and lightning illuminated the night sky in brilliant, jagged flashes. Rosalind was reading in her chamber a book of poetry forgotten in her lap when a small, timid knock came at her door. She opened it to find Lily, her small face white with fright and her delicate frame trembling visibly. "I'm frightened of the thunder, Rosalind," the little girl confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "Oh, my dear." Rosalind knelt immediately, gathering the shivering child into her arms. "Would you like to stay with me for a while?" Lily nodded against her shoulder, burrowing close. "William said I was being a baby, but I can't help it." "Even grown-ups can be frightened of storms," Rosalind assured her, stroking her fair hair. "Come, let's sit by the fire, and I'll tell you stories until you feel better." She had just settled Lily on the small sofa by the flickering fire when another knock came at her door. This time it was Thomas, trying to maintain his dignity despite his obvious discomfort. His small face was pale, and his eyes darted nervously as a particularly loud boom of thunder shook the house. "I've come to check on Lily," he announced, his voice a little too stiff. Rosalind hid a gentle smile. "How thoughtful, Thomas. Perhaps you'd like to join us." He hesitated for only a moment, then nodded, a silent acknowledgement of his own fear. Soon, both children were huddled beside her on the sofa, finding comfort in the warmth of the fire and Rosalind's calm presence as the storm raged outside. The door opened without a knock this time, revealing Arthur in his dressing gown, his face tight with concern. "The children aren't in their beds," he began, then stopped abruptly at the sight of them, curled beside Rosalind on the sofa. "They were a bit frightened by the storm," Rosalind explained softly, her hands stroking Lily's hair. Arthur's expression softened almost imperceptibly as his gaze fell upon his children. "Father, will you stay too?" Lily pleaded, her voice still a little tremulous. Rosalind saw Arthur stiffen, clearly uncomfortable with the casual intimacy of the scene. "I'm sure your father has important matters to attend to," she said, trying to ease his discomfort. "Actually," Arthur said, surprising them all, "I believe I can spare a few minutes." He lowered himself stiffly into a chair opposite them, his tall frame incongruous among the nursery furniture. "Please continue," Arthur said to Rosalind, his voice calm. She resumed her story, a tale of brave sailors weathering storms far greater than this one, guiding their ships safely home through treacherous waters. As she spoke, Rosalind became acutely aware of Arthur's gaze upon her. His eyes, usually so guarded, rarely left her face, watching her expressions as she spun her narrative. She noticed how his gaze warmed, a subtle softening around the edges, when she made the children laugh despite their fears. He watched her with a quiet intensity, a deep appreciation slowly dawning in his eyes. The storm outside finally began to abate, the thunder rumbling more distantly, and Lily's eyelids grew heavy, her small head resting against Rosalind's arm, finally at peace. When Rosalind finished her story, the room was quiet, save for the gentle crackling of the fire. Arthur rose. "I believe it's time these sailors returned to their own beds," he said, his voice quiet. "But, Father," Lily protested sleepily, stirring. "Couldn't we stay with Rosalind tonight?" Arthur glanced at Rosalind, a question in his eyes. "I don't mind," she said softly, offering a reassuring smile. "Please, Father," Thomas added unexpectedly, his own voice a drowsy plea. "Just for tonight." After a moment's consideration, Arthur nodded, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of concession. "Very well," he said, "but just this once." It was a small victory, a significant step in his acceptance of Rosalind as a maternal figure, and a testament to the quiet influence she now held. Rosalind helped settle the children into her large bed, tucking the blankets around them with gentle care. As she straightened, she found Arthur watching from the doorway, his expression unreadable, a complex mixture of gratitude and something more profound. "Thank you," he said quietly when she joined him, his voice low, for comforting them. "They're dear to me," she replied simply, her gaze meeting his. His eyes were intense, searching, holding hers. "You've become essential to them, too." He hesitated, his gaze sweeping over the grand, quiet chamber, to Blackwood. Rosalind felt the weight of unspoken words between them, a tangible current of emotion that tightened her chest. His admission, though carefully phrased, hinted at a deeper significance, a growing importance to him personally. The air thickened with the weight of unspoken words between them, a silent conversation brimming with longing and anticipation. Rosalind felt a tremor of hope, a desperate desire for him to speak what his eyes were saying. But before she could respond, before Arthur could take another step or utter another word, Lily's sleepy voice called out from the bed, "Rosalind, aren't you coming?" The spell was broken. Arthur stepped back, the moment dissolving into the practicalities of the night. "I should," Rosalind said, glancing towards the bed. "Yes, of course. Good night, Rosalind," Arthur said, his voice once again formal, though his eyes remained soft. "Good night, Arthur." They parted, leaving their feelings unexpressed, the possibility of their love hanging unresolved in the quiet chamber. In the days that followed, Arthur seemed both drawn to Rosalind and troubled by that attraction. His carefully constructed walls, briefly breached during the storm, were now being hastily reinforced. He continued to seek her company, joining her for tea or walks, engaging in animated discussions about estate matters or books, yet he maintained a careful emotional distance, a subtle barrier that Rosalind, uncertain of his true feelings and unwilling to risk the fragile peace they had established, dared not cross. She observed him, his conflicted expressions, his thoughtful silences, and wondered at the silent battle being waged within him. The unspoken desires between them created an electric tension, a constant hum beneath the surface of their polite interactions, leaving Rosalind in a state of cautious anticipation. The rhythm of Blackwood Manor was abruptly broken one late afternoon as Rosalind worked with Mrs. Gable on household accounts in the housekeeper's office. A message arrived from the village schoolmaster delivered by a breathless footman. A family had fallen gravely ill, and their 3 young children were left without care. "Your Grace," Mrs. Gable protested, her usual efficiency tinged with concern. "Surely the village authorities can manage this matter. It is not our place to interfere directly." But Rosalind shook her head, her compassion overriding protocol. 3 children with no one to care for them? I cannot ignore such need when it is within my power to help. Without hesitation, she ordered the carriage prepared. Lady Beatrice Beaumont, who had been present for a discussion about linen inventories, observed Rosalind with a look of undisguised disapproval, a silent judgment of this impulsive act. By the time Arthur returned from inspecting the tenant farms, Rosalind had already installed the 3 Campbell children, aged 3, 5, and 7, in a guest chamber, under Bess's watchful eye. The village doctor had assured her their illness was not contagious, merely the result of poor nutrition and cold conditions. "What is the meaning of this?" Arthur demanded, his voice low and dangerous, as he discovered the situation. His face was thunderous. "You've brought strangers into our home without consultation. This is highly irregular." "They needed immediate help, Arthur," Rosalind explained calmly, though her resolve was firm. "Their mother is in the infirmary, and their father was injured in the mill accident last month." "There are proper channels for such charity," he retorted, his jaw tight. "You overstep your authority." Lady Beatrice, who had followed Arthur, subtly nodded in agreement with his frustration, her expression a silent, "I told you so." "There are proper channels for such charity," Arthur repeated, his voice laced with disapproval. "They are children, Arthur," Rosalind interrupted, her tone holding no regret. "Not charity cases. Would you have had me leave them alone and afraid?" Her defiance startled him, his expression darkening further. Just then, to Arthur's surprise, Thomas appeared in the doorway behind his father, drawn by the raised voices. His small face was anxious, his eyes wide. "Are they very ill?" he asked anxiously, his gaze fixed on Rosalind. Rosalind softened immediately, her attention shifting to the boy. Arthur, momentarily distracted, looked from his son's worried face to Rosalind's determined one, a conflict playing out in his features. Rosalind knelt, reassuring Thomas. "No, dear, just tired and hungry. They'll be fine with proper care." Thomas's brow was still furrowed with concern. Might I visit them?" he asked hesitantly, surprising them all. "I could bring them some of my books, perhaps." Arthur stared at his son in astonishment. Thomas, who rarely showed interest in others, who guarded his possessions zealously, was offering to share with strangers. It was a clear, undeniable sign of Rosalind's influence, a testament to the compassion she had awakened in him. "That's very kind, William," Rosalind said warmly, her heart swelling with pride. "I'm sure they would appreciate it." Thomas looked to his father for permission, his earnest gaze unwavering. After a long moment, Arthur nodded, a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture of approval. When Thomas had gone, his small figure disappearing down the corridor, Arthur turned back to Rosalind, his expression conflicted, no longer solely angry, but thoughtful. "You've changed him," he stated, his voice quiet, almost an admission. "Changed them both." Rosalind met his gaze steadily, a gentle smile on her face. "Children learn by example," she said simply. "They have good hearts, Arthur. They only needed permission to show it." His conflicted expression softened further, a profound realization dawning in his eyes as he acknowledged the transformative impact she had had on his children, and perhaps, by extension, on himself. Arthur's voice softened further, a rare vulnerability in his tone. "As do you," he said, stepping a little closer. "Your compassion, it reminds me of Caroline." The name, spoken so naturally, still held a lingering sadness, but now it was tinged with a beautiful, unexpected parallel. Rosalind suggested gently, "She would have done exactly as you did today, Arthur. Helping those in need was always close to her heart, I imagine." Arthur nodded slowly, his gaze distant for a moment, confirming the painful but beautiful connection between his past and his present. It was a significant step in his healing, acknowledging that his love for Caroline didn't have to preclude new affection or shared values. Over the next week, the 3 Campbell children became temporary, yet cherished, members of the Blackwood household. To everyone's surprise, Thomas and Lily took them under their wing with remarkable ease, sharing toys, telling stories, and patiently explaining the Manor's routines. Arthur, initially resistant, found himself drawn into their games, his natural reserve melting in the face of childish enthusiasm. He laughed more freely than Rosalind had ever heard, spoke more openly, even joined in an impromptu game of hide-and-seek that left Mr. Finch, the butler, scandalized and the children utterly delighted. Mrs. Gable, the housekeeper, found her stern demeanor softening as she observed the warmth filling the house. Even Lady Beatrice, who typically maintained her formality, watched the scene with a hint of approval in her eyes, a subtle acknowledgment of the harmonious transformation Rosalind had orchestrated. One evening, as they sat together in the library after the children had gone to bed, the fire casting long shadows across the walls, Arthur regarded Rosalind with thoughtful eyes. "You've given Thomas and Lily something I could not," he said quietly, setting aside his book. Rosalind looked at him, waiting. "Joy," he continued, his voice soft. "The courage to open their hearts." He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "I thought I was protecting them by teaching them restraint, by shielding them from further pain. But you've shown me they need more than that, to truly live." Rosalind felt a rush of emotion at his words, a profound sense of gratitude that her efforts had not been in vain. His confession was a testament to her influence, a breakthrough she had barely dared to hope for. "They need you, Arthur," Rosalind affirmed, reaching out to gently touch his arm. "Your love, your wisdom, they treasure every moment you spend with them." Arthur turned his hand to clasp hers, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "And you?" he asked, his eyes intense, searching hers. "What do you need, Rosalind?" The question caught her off guard, a direct, vulnerable inquiry that pushed past all their carefully maintained boundaries. She began, her heart quickening, unsure how to articulate the burgeoning love she felt. Before she could answer, the library door burst open, and Lily ran in, her nightgown billowing around her, her face alight with excitement. "Rosalind!" "Arthur!" Young Thomas Campbell said his first word. He said, "Duck," when I showed him my wooden toys. Arthur chuckled, lifting his daughter onto his lap. "That's remarkable indeed. But shouldn't you be in bed, young lady?" "I was too excited to sleep," Lily confessed, "and then I heard a strange noise outside my window. Like scratching." "What sort of noise?" Rosalind asked, immediately concerned. "William says it's just the tree branches, but it sounded different." Arthur exchanged a glance with Rosalind, a hint of unease in his eyes. "I'll investigate," he promised. "Come, I'll take you back to bed and check on this mysterious noise." As Arthur left the library, Lily nestled in his arms. Rosalind was left with a curious mix of disappointment and anticipation. What might Arthur have said if they hadn't been interrupted? What might she have answered? The strange noise, the lingering romantic tension, and her own unspoken desires filled her mind as she stood alone in the quiet library. Unable to sleep, Rosalind wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and made her way to the small balcony adjoining her chambers. The spring air was cool but not unpleasant, scented with the first blooms of the season from the newly revitalized rose garden below. "Rosalind!" She turned, startled, to find Arthur standing in the shadows of the garden, looking up at her. "What are you doing out so late?" she asked, her voice a soft whisper in the quiet night. "I could ask the same of you," he replied, his voice a low rumble. "May I join you?" At her nod, he disappeared. Then, moments later, a soft knock came at her chamber door. Rosalind admitted him, suddenly conscious of her informal attire and loose hair. Arthur remained near the doorway, his presence filling the cozy space with a potent, unspoken energy. "I apologize for the intrusion," he said, his gaze intense in the candlelight. "But there was something I wished to say, and I find I cannot wait until morning." "What is it?" she asked, her heart quickening with a mixture of hope and apprehension. Arthur took a step closer, his expression serious. "When we married, I told you I would never love again. I believed it with absolute certainty. I was wrong." "I was wrong," he continued, his voice low and intense, a raw vulnerability in its depths. "What I feel for you, it has grown so gradually that I scarcely recognized it until it was too late to resist." Rosalind held her breath, afraid to hope, afraid to move. Her own heart throbbed with a similar, overwhelming realization. "Arthur," she whispered, unable to say more, her entire being filled with a fragile, soaring hope. The intensity of his gaze was a physical touch, pulling her closer without a single movement. He moved closer still, close enough that she could see the truth in his eyes, the undeniable longing. "I do not expect you to return these feelings. Our arrangement was never meant to be more than practical, but I find I cannot continue to treat you as merely the mistress of my household, the caretaker of my children, not when you have become so much more to me." Rosalind's heart soared at his words, a joyful echo of her own silent confession. "And if I told you that my feelings have changed as well," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "that what began as duty has become something else entirely." His eyes widened with a sudden, breathtaking hope. "Rosalind!" "I love you, Arthur," she said simply, the words a release she had held captive for months. "I have for some time now." For a moment he stood motionless, as if unable to believe her words. Then, with a sound that was half laugh, half sigh, he closed the distance between them. "I love you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I fought against it, told myself it was impossible, but I can deny it no longer." Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head until his lips met hers in a tender, searching kiss. Rosalind responded with all the feeling she had kept hidden, her arms slipping around his neck as his encircled her waist. When they finally parted, Arthur rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her skin. "Stay with me," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Be my wife in truth, not just in name." "Yes," she answered without hesitation, her own voice barely audible. "With all my heart, yes." That night, their marriage was finally consummated, not as the cold arrangement it had begun, but as a union of deep and genuine love. born of shared grief and unexpected, undeniable affection. As dawn broke over Blackwood Manor, Rosalind lay in Arthur's arms, her head resting on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath her ear. The room was bathed in a soft, ethereal light, painting their faces with a gentle glow. "What changed?" she asked softly, tracing the line of his jaw with her finger. "When did you begin to see me differently?" He was quiet for a moment, his fingers trailing through her hair, a contented sigh escaping him. "There wasn't a single moment," he said finally. "It was countless small things." "It was countless small things," Arthur continued, his voice soft with reflection. "The way you read to the children, how you stood your ground when you believed you were right, your compassion for the Campbell family, even when it meant defying me." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "You brought life back to Blackwood, Rosalind, to me." She smiled, nestling closer into his embrace. "And you gave me a home, Arthur, a family, a second chance at a happiness I thought was lost forever." "We should tell the children," Arthur said, his tone thoughtful, as the first birdsong drifted through the open balcony doors, "that things have changed between us." Rosalind chuckled softly, a warmth spreading through her chest. "Do you think they'll understand?" He pulled her closer, a gentle laugh rumbling in his chest. "I suspect," he replied, his eyes twinkling. "They've understood far longer than we have." The morning light filled the room, promising a new beginning. Spring blossomed fully at Blackwood, transforming the austere landscape into a riot of color and life. The change in the estate mirrored the transformation within its walls. Where once silence and formality had reigned, now laughter and warmth prevailed. Arthur and Rosalind no longer maintained the pretense of a marriage in name only. They shared chambers, took meals with the children whenever possible, and were often seen walking the grounds together, their hands entwined, their conversation animated and free. Blackwood Manor, once a monument to grief, now pulsed with a vibrant, living energy. The children flourished in this new atmosphere of security and warmth. Lily's natural exuberance found free expression, her laughter echoing through the halls. Thomas, though still reserved, found his serious nature increasingly balanced by moments of boyish enthusiasm and open curiosity. He adored his stepmother openly now, seeking her guidance and affection without reservation, a stark contrast to his earlier wary demeanor. They had, indeed, understood far longer than their parents. One afternoon, as Arthur taught Thomas the basics of carpentry in the newly established workshop, Thomas paused, observing his father with a perceptive gaze. "You're different, father," he stated with characteristic directness. "Am I?" Arthur asked, guiding William's small hands on the plane. "You laugh more," the boy said seriously. "And you don't look sad when you think no one is watching." Arthur paused, moved by his son's perception. "I am happier now," he acknowledged, a soft smile gracing his lips. Rosalind, who had just entered, watched proudly from the doorway. "Are you, William?" Arthur asked, his voice gentle. The boy nodded solemnly. "I like it when you and Rosalind are happy together. It makes everything feel right, like a proper family." Thomas then hesitated, his brow furrowing slightly. "Do you think Mother would mind that we're happy now?" Arthur set down his tools and knelt before his son, his expression tender. "Your mother loved you more than anything in the world, Thomas. Her greatest wish would be for your happiness." He touched the boy's cheek gently, and I believe she would be pleased that Rosalind cares for you as she would have. That evening, as Rosalind brushed out her hair in their bedchamber, Arthur shared the conversation he'd had with Thomas. "He worries that being happy somehow dishonors Caroline's memory," Arthur said, his voice tinged with a familiar sadness. Arthur moved behind her, gently taking the brush from her hands to continue the task himself. "I've been thinking," he said, as he drew the brush through her chestnut waves, "that perhaps we should speak more openly of Caroline, not just when the children ask, but as a natural part of their lives." Rosalind met his eyes in the mirror. "I think that would bring them comfort." Rosalind turned to face him, taking his hands in hers. "Arthur, Caroline will always be a part of your life, of the children's lives. Loving me doesn't diminish what you shared with her, just as my feelings for you don't lessen the affection I held for my first husband, Edward." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, a profound gratitude in his embrace. "How did I come to deserve such wisdom and grace?" "The same way I came to deserve such love," she replied, smiling up at him. Pure, unexpected fortune. May arrived, bringing with it plans for Lily's 6th birthday. The little girl had requested a picnic by the lake with games and treats for her small circle of friends from the village. Rosalind threw herself into the preparations, determined to make the day special. She commissioned a new doll from the finest toy maker in London, sewed a matching dress for Lily to wear, and arranged for a small orchestra to play during the celebration. Lily was ecstatic, twirling in her new dress, while Thomas watched with the indulgent tolerance of an older brother. "You look very pretty," Thomas conceded when Lily demanded his opinion. "Like a princess?" she pressed. "Like a very nice lily," he replied diplomatically. Rosalind laughed, adjusting the ribbon in the little girl's hair. "You both look wonderful. Now, shall we see if your father is ready?" They found Arthur in his study, completing some urgent correspondence before the day's festivities. He looked up as they entered, his face lighting with pleasure at the sight of them. "My, what elegant company," he declared, setting aside his pen. "Especially the birthday girl." Lily performed an exaggerated curtsy, then rushed to hug him. "Is it time for the picnic yet, Father?" "Nearly," he assured her. "I've just one more letter to sign, and then I'm entirely at your disposal for the day." "Promise?" she asked seriously. "You have my word as a duke," he replied with equal gravity, though his eyes twinkled. The picnic was a tremendous success. The children played games on the lawn, sloping down to the lake, while the adults conversed in the shade of ancient oaks. Rosalind, watching Arthur join in a spirited game of blind man's buff, felt her heart swell with love for this man who had transformed from the cold, forbidding Duke into a doting father and husband. Lady Beatrice, present as an honored guest, observed the joyous scene with a genuine, if subtle, smile, her earlier skepticism replaced by quiet approval for the warmth Rosalind had brought to Blackwood. Later, as Lily opened her gifts, surrounded by admiring friends, Thomas appeared at Rosalind's side. "She's very happy," he observed. "Yes, she is," Rosalind agreed. "Are you enjoying the day as well?" He nodded. "Father asked if I might like a similar celebration for my birthday in August." "And what did you say?" "That I'd prefer a smaller gathering, perhaps just the 4 of us with a fishing expedition on the lake." Rosalind smiled, deeply touched by his inclusion of her in his family circle. "That sounds perfect." As the day wound to a close and the guests departed, Lily declared it had been the very best birthday in the history of birthdays. Exhausted but elated, she fell asleep in the carriage on the short journey back to the house. Arthur carried her up to bed, with Rosalind and Thomas following behind. As they tucked her in, still in her party dress since she was too tired for night clothes, Lily stirred briefly. "Thank you for my perfect day," she murmured sleepily. "You're very welcome, sweetheart," Rosalind whispered, kissing her forehead. In the corridor outside, Thomas hesitated before heading to his own room. "It was a good day," he said, his tone conveying deeper meaning than the simple words. "It was," Arthur agreed, placing a hand on his son's shoulder, his gaze meeting Rosalind's over the boy's head. "One of many to come, I hope." The boy nodded, then surprised them both by hugging Rosalind tightly before retreating to his chamber. It was a silent, powerful affirmation of her place in their lives. As they walked to their own rooms, Arthur drew Rosalind close. "Have I told you today how much I love you?" "You have," she smiled, nestling her head against his shoulder, "but I never tire of hearing it." Later, as they lay entwined in the peaceful darkness, Rosalind reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as a cold arrangement had blossomed into the deepest love she had ever known. "How fortunate I am," she whispered. "How different life might have been had Mr. Abernathy not arranged our meeting." "It wasn't fortune," Arthur said, pulling her closer, his voice drowsy. "It was inevitable. Some part of me knew from the first moment I saw you standing in the entrance hall, trying so valiantly to hide your apprehension, that you would change everything." Rosalind chuckled softly. "You certainly concealed it well with your talk of business arrangements and practical considerations." "Mere self-defense," he admitted, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I was terrified of feeling anything again, of risking the pain of loss." "And now?" Rosalind asked, her voice soft. "Now I know that what we have is worth any risk." He kissed her softly, pouring all his emotion into the gesture. Rosalind nestled closer, content in their shared love, feeling completely safe and cherished. They drifted to sleep, their hearts finally at peace, the quiet promise of their shared future a warm blanket around them. The shadows of the past had receded, replaced by the light of a profound and enduring love. The following weeks passed in a haze of contentment. Arthur included Rosalind in estate matters, valuing her practical mind and compassionate perspective. Together, they implemented improvements for the tenants, established a small school on the estate for the workers' children, and hosted a May Day celebration that brought together all classes in a day of shared pleasure. Through it all, their love deepened, rooted now in genuine partnership as well as affection. Lady Beatrice, observing their harmonious partnership, now showed quiet respect for Rosalind's contributions. Her earlier disapproval softened into a watchful, yet approving, gaze. Rosalind awoke, feeling strangely unwell. It was a subtle nausea, a faint dizziness that passed quickly, but returned the next day, and the next. "Perhaps you should consult Dr. Harrison, my dear," Arthur suggested, his brow furrowed with concern as he noted the paleness of her normally rosy complexion over breakfast. Rosalind, ever practical, waved away his worries. "It's nothing serious, Arthur, merely a passing indisposition, I assure you." Yet, as the peculiar symptoms persisted for a week, a quiet, insistent voice in her heart began to whisper a different truth. Reluctantly, she agreed to see the doctor. Dr. Harrison's examination in the drawing room was thorough, his questions precise, and his touch gentle. When he finally straightened, a warm smile spread across his face, a stark contrast to the usual medical gravity. "Congratulations, Your Grace," he announced, turning to Rosalind. "You are with child. I estimate the birth will occur in early January." Rosalind sat motionless, the words washing over her in a flood of overwhelming emotions. A child. Their child. The heir Arthur had initially sought in their cold, practical arrangement, now to be born of genuine, undeniable love. Lady Beatrice Beaumont, who had been visiting and was present for a household discussion, looked on from a nearby armchair, her expression a mix of profound surprise and a quiet, almost tender hope she rarely allowed to show. Rosalind found Arthur in the library, his head bent over estate maps, the late afternoon sun illuminating the silver threads at his temples. When he looked up and saw her standing in the doorway, his expression immediately shifted from focused work to concern. "Rosalind, what did the doctor say?" She moved to him, taking his hands in hers, her heart thrumming with a joy she could barely contain. "Arthur, I'm with child." For a moment, he stood perfectly still, his tall frame rigid, his face registering a cascade of emotions, first shock, then a dawning wonder, and finally an intense joy so profound it brought tears to his eyes. "A child?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Our child. Are you pleased?" Rosalind asked, though his reaction left little doubt. In answer, he swept her into a gentle embrace, holding her close, his chin resting on her hair. "Please, Rosalind, you have given me more happiness than I ever thought possible, and now this gift as well." His voice was rough with emotion. "I am beyond pleased. I am overwhelmed with gratitude and love." Rosalind nestled into his embrace, a profound sense of peace settling over her. This child, born of their unexpected love, was the ultimate testament to their journey, a promise of an even brighter future for Blackwood and its inhabitants. The news of Rosalind's pregnancy brought fresh joy to Blackwood Manor, rippling through the household and especially delighting the children. Lily was ecstatic at the prospect of a baby sibling, immediately volunteering to help in every way possible. chattering endlessly about tiny clothes and lullabies. Thomas's reaction was more measured, but his quiet excitement was evident in the careful way he began to make space in the nursery for the new arrival. Without being asked, he rearranged his own belongings, making room for a cradle, a subtle but deeply heartwarming sign of his acceptance and burgeoning responsibility. Rosalind and Arthur watched them, their hearts full, knowing this child would be welcomed by a family already made whole. Arthur was transformed by the news, his happiness evident in everything he did. He insisted Rosalind rest frequently, brought her special treats from the kitchen, and spent hours discussing names and plans for the child's future. Yet Rosalind sometimes caught a flicker of fear in his eyes, a shadow he tried to hide, but she knew its source. Caroline, his first wife, had died in childbirth, along with their infant. One evening, as they sat together in their private sitting room, Rosalind finally addressed his unspoken fear. "Arthur," she said gently, taking his hand, "I am well and strong. Dr. Harrison says everything is progressing perfectly." He attempted a smile, a strained line on his lips. "Of course, my dear, I have no doubts." "But you do," she countered softly, her gaze unwavering. "And it's natural that you should. What happened to Caroline was a tragedy beyond bearing, but it does not mean history will repeat itself." He looked away, his jaw tight with emotion, the raw fear in his eyes laid bare. "I cannot lose you, Rosalind. The thought alone is unbearable." "You won't lose me," she assured him, squeezing his hand. "I promise you, we'll face this together, as we have everything else." Her resolute strength seemed to offer him a fragile tether, anchoring him in the present, away from the haunting memories of the past. In the weeks that followed, Rosalind did everything possible to demonstrate her good health and spirits, while Arthur hovered protectively. His anxiety, though somewhat eased by her reassurances, translated into a vigilant care. He arranged for the finest midwife in London to attend the birth, consulted multiple physicians about the latest advances in maternal care, and insisted on accompanying Rosalind whenever she ventured beyond their chambers. Lady Beatrice, now genuinely concerned for Rosalind's well-being, discreetly inquired of Mrs. Gable about the Duchess's health, a quiet testament to her evolving respect and care. As summer gave way to autumn, Rosalind's body changed, her slender frame now gracefully rounded with new life. Arthur watched these transformations with a mingled adoration and anxiety, his love for her deepening even as his protective instincts intensified. He would often sit by her, his hand resting gently on her swelling abdomen, a silent conversation passing between them. The children, too, responded to the coming arrival in their own unique ways, their excitement a constant, joyful hum throughout the manor. Lily, ever the imaginative one, spoke constantly to Rosalind's swelling abdomen, convinced the baby could hear her through the soft layers of fabric. "Hello, little one," she would whisper, pressing her ear to Rosalind's belly. "Are you ready to play hide-and-seek?" Thomas, more pragmatic, began researching infant development in the library's medical texts, gravely informing Rosalind of what to expect at each stage, from the baby's first cries to the eventual eruption of teeth. Their palpable excitement filled the days with warmth, a living anticipation of the new life soon to join their family. It was Thomas who first noticed Rosalind's fatigue as they walked in the expansive gardens one crisp October afternoon. "You're pale," he observed with characteristic directness, his gray eyes, so like his father's, fixed on her. "Should you be resting?" Rosalind smiled reassuringly. "I'm just a little tired, Thomas. Nothing to worry about." But the boy's brow furrowed with concern, a miniature version of Arthur's own worried expression. "Father would want you to rest." Rosalind, knowing Arthur's heightened anxiety, agreed. "You are quite right, my dear. Perhaps we should turn back now." That evening, Rosalind found herself unusually weary. Arthur, noticing her discomfort, insisted on summoning Dr. Harrison, despite her protests that it was merely the natural fatigue of pregnancy. The doctor's examination revealed nothing alarming, though he recommended increased rest and a tonic to strengthen her system. Arthur, not satisfied, announced his intention to bring a specialist from London. "That's entirely unnecessary, Arthur," Rosalind protested gently. Dr. Harrison has delivered hundreds of babies safely. I will take no chances with your health, Arthur replied, his tone brooking no argument, the shadow of past grief momentarily darkening his eyes. The specialist, a distinguished physician who had attended royalty, confirmed Dr. Harrison's assessment. Rosalind was experiencing a normal pregnancy, though he too advised additional rest as her confinement approached. Somewhat reassured, Arthur relaxed his vigilance slightly, though he still insisted on accompanying Rosalind whenever she ventured beyond their chambers. The entire household adjusted to this new routine, the servants quietly ensuring that the Duchess's comfort was prioritized in every way. Lady Beatrice, observing Rosalind's quiet strength and the devoted care Arthur showed, now looked upon her with a gaze of genuine concern and respect. November brought the first snow, transforming Blackwood Manor into a glistening wonderland that delighted Lily and prompted Thomas to design an elaborate snow fort. Rosalind watched from the window as Arthur joined the children in their play, his deep laugh carrying across the frosty air. "Your father seems happy," she remarked to Thomas when he came in later, his cheeks flushed with cold. "He is," the boy agreed, accepting the hot chocolate Bess had prepared. "He says you have brought the sun back to Blackwood." Rosalind smiled, touched by the poetic sentiment so at odds with Arthur's usual practical nature. "Did he really say that?" she asked softly. That night, as Arthur read aloud to her from a new novel, Rosalind felt the baby move vigorously within her. "Oh!" she exclaimed, placing a hand on her rounded belly. Arthur immediately set aside the book, his attention instantly on her. "What is it? Are you unwell?" "No, no," she laughed, taking his hand and placing it where the child kicked. "Feel, the baby is dancing." His expression transformed with wonder as he felt the strong movements beneath his palm, a tiny life asserting its presence. "That's remarkable," he whispered, his eyes wide with a joy that eased the last vestiges of his fear. "Our child is strong," Rosalind said softly. "Like its father," he added, his eyes shining with emotion. As December arrived, preparations for both Christmas and the baby's arrival occupied the household. Rosalind supervised the seasonal decorations from a comfortable chair, while Arthur divided his time between estate matters and ensuring every detail of the nursery was perfect. One afternoon, while Arthur was meeting with tenants and the children were at their lessons, Rosalind decided to rest in their bedchamber. As she entered, something white on her pillow caught her eye. A letter. Curious, she picked it up. The handwriting was clearly Thomas's, careful and deliberate. The message, written on the finest stationery, was brief but powerful. "Dear Rosalind, Lily and I have talked about it, and we wanted you to know we choose you. We love Father, and we loved our first mother, but we choose you too to be our mother now and forever. With all our love, Thomas and Lily." Tears filled Rosalind's eyes as she read the simple, heartfelt declaration. This gift, this acceptance from Thomas and Lily, meant more to her than any title or fortune ever could. She was still holding the letter, tears streaming down her face when Arthur returned. His expression immediately shifted from greeting to concern. "Rosalind, what's wrong?" He crossed the room quickly, kneeling before her chair. Wordlessly, she handed him the letter. As he read, his own eyes grew moist. "They left it on my pillow," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Arthur took her hands in his. "Of course they do. How could they not love you as I do?" he assured her, his voice tender. "You've tried so hard to honor Caroline's memory while caring for them as your own, and you've succeeded beyond any hope I could have had. You've given them permission to love again, just as you did for me." Rosalind wiped away her tears, smiling through her emotion. "I should thank them. Where are they now?" "In the library with Miss Everard." Arthur rose carefully. "Shall I fetch them?" "No, let's go to them together." She rose carefully, one hand supporting her rounded belly. They found the children bent over their lessons, Thomas explaining a geography concept to Lily with serious patience. When they looked up and saw Rosalind's face, they exchanged nervous glances. "Did you receive our letter?" Thomas asked, his voice deliberately steady, though his hands fidgeted with his pencil. "I did," Rosalind replied, her voice thick with emotion. "It's the most beautiful gift I've ever received. Lily slipped from her chair and hurried to Rosalind's side. "We meant it," she declared earnestly. "We choose you to be our mother forever and ever." Thomas approached more slowly, his expression solemn. "Is that acceptable to you?" Rosalind opened her arms, and Thomas, abandoning his usual reserve, joined his sister in embracing her. "Nothing would make me happier or more proud," she told them, her voice choked with love, "than to be your mother in every way that matters. All three of you now." Arthur watched the scene, his heart full beyond measure. His family, once fractured by loss, was whole again, stronger perhaps for having been broken and mended with love's careful attention. "Miss Everard," he said quietly to the governess, who was discreetly wiping her own eyes, "perhaps the children might be excused from their remaining lessons today." "Of course, Your Grace," she agreed with unusual warmth. "Special circumstances indeed." That evening they dined together in the small family dining room, rather than the formal great hall. The conversation flowed easily, filled with plans for Christmas and the baby's arrival. Rosalind noticed how Thomas now addressed her directly rather than through his father, how Lily leaned against her arm with complete trust and affection. Later, as she and Arthur prepared for bed, he drew her into his arms. "Happy?" he asked, though her radiant expression answered the question. "Beyond words," she replied. "When I think of how we began, you warning me never to expect your love, me accepting a marriage of convenience out of necessity, it seems like a different lifetime." "It was," he said thoughtfully, pressing a kiss to her hair. "You've given me a new life, Rosalind, a second chance I never thought possible." Christmas Eve arrived with a gentle snowfall that transformed Blackwood Manor into a glistening wonderland. The four of them gathered in the great hall, now festively decorated with greenery and candles, to place the final ornaments on the tree. "This one is from last year," Lily announced, carefully hanging a painted wooden star. "Rosalind helped me make it, remember? And this one," Thomas added, displaying a delicate glass ship, "was Father's gift to me." Rosalind watched them, one hand resting on her abdomen, where the baby moved restlessly. Every object on the tree told a story of their family's journey, from grief to healing, from formality to love. Arthur joined her, his arms slipping around her waist. "Are you tired? Should you rest before dinner?" "I'm perfectly fine," she assured him, leaning into his embrace. "I wouldn't miss this for anything." They were interrupted by Mr. Finch, who entered bearing a small package. "A delivery for Her Grace," he announced. "Just arrived from London." Rosalind accepted the parcel with surprise. "How curious! I wasn't expecting anything." Opening it, she found a small velvet box containing a magnificent pendant, a heart-shaped diamond surrounded by smaller stones that caught the firelight and scattered it in rainbow patterns. "Arthur," she breathed, her eyes wide. "It's exquisite," he smiled, clearly pleased by her reaction. "A Christmas gift, and something more. Look inside the box." Beneath the pendant lay a folded note in Arthur's familiar handwriting. "To my beloved wife, you have taught me that a heart once broken can not only heal but grow stronger. This pendant symbolizes my promise to love you today and all our tomorrows, with eternal devotion, Arthur." "Oh, Arthur," she whispered, tears threatening again. "It's beautiful." He took the pendant from its box and fastened it around her neck, his fingers lingering at her nape. "Not nearly as beautiful as you." Christmas Day dawned, bright and clear. The morning was spent exchanging gifts by the fire, the children's excitement filling the house with joyous noise. For Arthur and Rosalind, it was a day of profound gratitude. That night, after the children had gone to bed, still chattering about the day's events, Rosalind and Arthur sat together before the fire in their private sitting room. The baby was particularly active, prompting Rosalind to laugh as a vigorous kick made her jump slightly. "I believe our child will be quite athletic," she remarked, guiding Arthur's hand to feel the movement. "Or perhaps musical," he suggested with a smile, "like its mother." Rosalind was about to reply when a sharp pain caught her by surprise. She gasped, her hand tightening around Arthur's. "Rosalind!" Alarm sharpened his voice. "What is it?" "I'm not sure," she began, but another pain, stronger than the first, interrupted her words. "Oh!" Arthur was immediately on his feet. "I'll send for Dr. Harrison." "Wait," she said, trying to remain calm. "It may be nothing. False pains are common in the later months." But another contraction, undeniably real, made her reconsider. Perhaps the doctor would be wise, after all. Arthur rang for a servant, with such urgency that Mr. Finch appeared within moments, still in his evening attire. "Fetch Dr. Harrison immediately," Arthur ordered, his voice tight with fear. "Tell him the Duchess may be in labor." "Yes, Your Grace." The butler departed swiftly, recognizing the seriousness of the situation. Arthur returned to Rosalind's side, his face pale with concern. "Let's get you to bed," he said gently. "Can you walk? Or shall I carry you?" "I can walk," she assured him, though she leaned heavily on his arm as another pain seized her. By the time they reached their chambers, the contractions were coming regularly. Bess arrived, having been alerted by Mr. Finch, and immediately began preparing the room according to the doctor's previous instructions. "It's too early," Arthur muttered, pacing beside the bed where Rosalind now lay. "The baby isn't due for another fortnight at least." "Babies have their own schedules," Bess said practically, though she too looked concerned. "First ones often come a bit early." Dr. Harrison arrived within the hour, his examination confirming what they already suspected. "The baby is coming tonight, Your Grace," he told Rosalind calmly. "Everything appears normal, though slightly ahead of schedule." Arthur's face had gone pale, his eyes wide with a familiar terror. "Is there any danger?" "No more than any birth," the doctor replied, his manner reassuring. "Her Grace is young and healthy, and the baby has been developing well." But Arthur could not be easily comforted, his mind haunted by memories of another Christmas, another birthing chamber. "I should send for the specialist in London," he said, moving toward the door. "There's no time," Dr. Harrison said firmly. "The baby will arrive before morning. I assure you, Your Grace, I am fully capable of attending the Duchess." Rosalind reached for Arthur's hand. "Stay with me," she pleaded, her voice a little strained but firm. "I need you here, not fretting about London specialists." The naked fear in his eyes nearly broke her heart. "I cannot lose you," he whispered, clutching her hand. "You won't," she promised, meeting his gaze with unwavering determination. "We'll face this together, as we have everything else." The labor progressed steadily through the night. Rosalind bore the pain with remarkable composure, while Arthur remained by her side, his initial panic giving way to steady support. He bathed her forehead, held her hand through contractions, and whispered encouragement when her strength began to flag. As dawn approached, Dr. Harrison announced that the time had come. "The baby is ready to meet the world," he said cheerfully. "One more good push, Your Grace." Rosalind gathered her remaining strength, gripping Arthur's hand tightly as she followed the doctor's instructions. There was a moment of intense pain, followed by the most beautiful sound she had ever heard, the lusty cry of their newborn child. "A boy," Dr. Harrison announced triumphantly. "A fine, healthy son." Arthur stood transfixed, watching as the doctor placed the squalling infant on Rosalind's chest. The baby, red-faced and indignant at his abrupt entry into the world, gradually quieted as Rosalind cradled him close. "Hello, little one," she whispered, tears of joy streaming down her face. "And we've been waiting for you." Arthur found his voice at last. "Rosalind," he breathed. "He's perfect. You're perfect." He touched the baby's tiny hand with a reverent finger. "Our son." After the doctor had completed his examination of both mother and child, pronouncing them excellently well, and Bess had helped clean and settle them, Arthur was finally able to hold his son. "He has your eyes," Rosalind observed drowsily from the bed, exhaustion claiming her now that the ordeal was over. "And your chin," Arthur replied, studying the infant's face with wonder. "What shall we name him?" They had discussed various possibilities over the past months, but had not settled on a final choice. Now, looking at their son's solemn expression, so like Thomas's, Rosalind knew. "James," she said softly, "after your father." Arthur's eyes filled with fresh tears. "James," he repeated. "James Caldwell." A gentle knock at the door preceded Thomas's anxious face, peering into the room. "Father, is Rosalind?" "Come in," Arthur called softly. "There's someone you should meet." Thomas entered cautiously, followed by Lily, who was practically bouncing with excitement despite the early hour. They approached the bed where Rosalind lay, their eyes wide at the sight of the tiny bundle in their father's arms. "Children," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is your brother, James." Thomas stared at the baby with fascination. "He's very small. But he'll grow," Rosalind assured him, "just as you did." Lily clambered onto the bed, mindful of Rosalind's comfort. "Can I touch him?" "Gently," Arthur cautioned, bringing James closer for the children to see. "Hello, James," Lily whispered, stroking the baby's cheek with a feather-like touch. "I'm your sister." Thomas hung back slightly, watching the scene with an expression Rosalind couldn't quite interpret. "Thomas," she called softly, "are you all right?" The boy looked up, his eyes suspiciously bright. Is he truly our brother, even though—" Understanding dawned. "Even though I'm not your birth mother," Rosalind finished gently. "Of course he is. We are a family, Thomas, all of us." "The letter we wrote," he said hesitantly. "We meant it. We chose you to be our mother." "And I chose you as my children," she replied, holding out her free arm to him. "All three of you now." Thomas moved forward then, allowing himself to be drawn into a careful embrace. "He's rather handsome," he conceded, examining his new brother with cautious approval. Arthur watched his family, his wife, his two eldest children, and the newborn son he had once feared would never exist, and felt a completeness he had never thought to experience again. The shadow of his first wife's death, which had haunted him for so long, seemed finally to lift in the presence of this new life, this new chance at happiness. In the days that followed, Blackwood Manor adjusted to its newest member. The children were endlessly fascinated by the baby, with Thomas assuming a serious protective role and Lily appointing herself assistant nursemaid. Rosalind recovered swiftly, her natural vigor reasserting itself. Within a week, she was able to join the family for meals, carrying James proudly for all to admire. Arthur watched over them all with a newfound serenity. The fear that had gripped him throughout Rosalind's pregnancy had finally released its hold, allowing him to embrace the joy of their expanded family without reservation. Lady Beatrice, visiting one afternoon, observed the happy family with a look of serene approval, finally at peace with the new Duchess and the vibrant life that now filled Blackwood. One evening, as January snow fell softly outside the windows, the five of them gathered in the family sitting room. The children sat on the floor playing a quiet game, while Rosalind nursed James discreetly in a comfortable chair. Arthur, watching them from his position by the fire, was struck by how completely his life had transformed in the span of a year. Last January, Blackwood had been a cold, empty place, its master as frozen as the winter landscape. Now warmth and life filled every corner, from the children's laughter to the baby's soft coos. "What are you thinking?" Rosalind asked, noticing his thoughtful expression. "That I am the most fortunate of men," he replied simply. Thomas looked up from the game. "Because you have Blackwood?" Arthur smiled, shaking his head. "Because I have all of you." Lily beamed at this declaration while Thomas ducked his head, pleased but embarrassed by the sentiment. Later, when the children had gone to bed and James slept peacefully in his cradle, Arthur and Rosalind stood together at the window, watching the snowflakes drift down in the moonlight. "I told you once that I would never love again," Arthur said softly, his arms encircling her waist. "That my heart was buried with Caroline." "And I accepted those terms," Rosalind remembered. "How distant that seems now." "I believed it then," he confessed. "I truly thought myself incapable of loving anyone as I had loved her." Rosalind turned in his arms to face him. "And now?" "Now I know that the heart has an infinite capacity for love," he said, his voice low and fervent. What I feel for you doesn't diminish what I felt for Caroline. It exists alongside it, equally powerful, but entirely different." "As it should be," she replied, touching his face gently. "Love isn't diminished by being shared." He kissed her then, pouring all his emotion into the gesture. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "When you came to Blackwood, I offered you a cold arrangement. You've transformed it into the warmest of homes." "We did that together," she corrected him. "You, me, Thomas, Lily, and now James, each of us bringing our own light." From the cradle came a small sound, not quite a cry, but a gentle reminder of the new life they had created together. Rosalind moved to attend to their son, lifting him with practiced care. "He has your temperament," Arthur observed, watching as the baby settled immediately in his mother's arms, calm and steady. "With perhaps a touch of your determination," she replied with a smile. "He knows exactly what he wants." As they stood together in the soft lamplight, their son cradled between them, Rosalind reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this moment. What had begun as necessity, a practical arrangement between strangers, had blossomed into the deepest love, creating a family bound not by obligation, but by choice. "I love you, Arthur," she said simply, the words encompassing all that lay between them, past grief and present joy, challenges overcome and future promises. "And I love you, Rosalind," he replied, "more than I ever believed possible." Outside, the snow continued to fall, wrapping Blackwood Manor in a blanket of white that glistened in the moonlight. Inside, the warmth of family and love kept winter's chill at bay, a testament to hearts that had chosen to love again, to children who had chosen a mother, and to a duke who had discovered that his vow never to love again had been the one promise worth breaking.